Thank you for joining us for today's discussion. I'm Kim Turner, and I'm pleased to be joined by Dan Bieler. Dan is the principal analyst at Forrester, and Dan's research and consulting at Forrester is focused almost exclusively on innovation. His career experiences from investment banking to high tech to research enable him to bring a variety of perspectives to innovation as a driver of value in the enterprise. Today, Dan will be sharing his insights into the changing dynamics of innovation, the importance of employee engagement in innovation, customer experience, and digital transformation, and discovering and addressing innovation capability gaps for future success. Throughout the session, I will also be sharing some of Spigot's related insights from our 2018 State of Crowdsourced Innovation report in the context of Dan's presentation. Before we dive in, I'd like to share a bit of background about Spigot. Spigot enables organizations to engage employees in ideation to create and manage a pipeline of ideas. These ideas translate into initiatives that can drive new business strategies, new product development, and operational efficiencies. And Spigot enables business leaders to find the best ideas and foster a culture of innovation. As the largest provider of innovation management solutions, we've had the privilege of serving some of the world's most influential enterprises and largest consulting firms. As such, we've launched more than 1,000 crowdsourced innovation challenges across many industries and geographies. This translates into a level of expertise that is highly valued by our customers, and our innovation strategists work hand in glove with our clients to ensure their program success and are bringing to bear experiences across companies and industries. With that background, I'd like to invite Dan to kick us off. Dan, thanks so much for joining us today.
Thank you very much, Kim. It's a pleasure being on the webinar here and to share some of the insights that we at Forrester have regarding employee engagement, experience, also the interaction with innovation. I'd like to share some of the introductory thoughts with you regarding the topics of innovation and employee engagement, because when I started off to put the slides together for this webinar, I wasn't quite sure what activity comes first. Is it innovation that drives employee engagement, or is it employee engagement that drives innovation? And also, we need to ask ourselves, why are we talking about employee experience and employee engagement? Now, there are a couple of good reasons why we should do this. For instance, a study by consulting firm Aon Hewitt said that a 5% improvement in employee engagement translates into a 3% growth in sales. IBM has done a study a while ago where they found that 95% of employees with a great employee experience do very happily also conduct some discretionary work that goes well beyond what is required for the job. And this number drops down to 55% for those employees that have a bad employee experience. And the flip side is also true. A university study recently has shown that a rise of employee churn from 12 to 22% translated into a reduction of productivity by 40% and a reduction in the operating margins of 26%. And before we really kick off, I also should say something about definitions, because there's quite a bit of confusion around. Now, for us, employee experience is the sum of employee perceptions at work. And separately, the employee satisfaction describes the status of the employee's happiness at work. And a question like, what can I get from my organization, would describe the state of happiness in a way. And then quite separately, the employee engagement, on the other hand, is the nature of the relationship between the employee and the organization. And here, the employee would ask, what am I willing to give back to my organization, rather than what can I get from my organization? And so employee engagement, in many respects, is the outcome of a great employee experience. And separately, employee engagement is also a good measure of the discretionary effort our employee is prepared to give. And of course, discretionary efforts make a big difference They make the difference between ordinary and an extraordinary business result and customer experience. Now, with this, I'd like to move on to the reasons why we are talking about employee engagement. And on the next slide, you see that we should talk about employee engagement in the context of innovation because the dynamics of innovation are changing. And we see that employee engagement and experience really matter for innovation, customer experience, digital transformation. And we see that it's important to assert and assess your innovation capability and the maturity of your innovation maturity before you really define a precise employee engagement strategy. And then we look at steps how to overcome the innovation gaps. We believe that innovation in a digital context is quite different from the traditional approach to innovation for several reasons. And I'm highlighting here some of the top core reasons that we see out there. Firstly, there is a new type of innovation ecosystem and the contributors to these ecosystems. We see public-private partnerships emerging. We see a much larger number of startups being part of the ecosystems, universities, accelerators, industry organizations. Secondly, we see that there are many more stakeholders that you need to involve as part of your innovation activities. It's not just the R&D team, but you need to reach out to partners, to the marketing team, customers, the finance team. So many more parties are involved here, and managing this multi-stakeholder innovation team is, of course, much harder than to just deal with a normal R&D environment. Thirdly, there are 4 key roles always involved in innovation. There's an innovator, someone who finances the innovation, someone who then implements the ideas into a financially viable model, and a broker who manages the different parties involved here. What we see in a digital context is that some of these roles will be managed by external parties increasingly. So it's not just an internal story. And lastly, we see that technology makes a big difference to innovation. The anything as a service, the many different platforms out there that are available mean that technology is available at scale. It's fairly easy to use. It's pretty affordable. It's there on demand, at great speed, and at a global reach. So these 4 components already indicate that the innovation in a digital context is quite different. And we see that there is a reason why more and more people are looking at innovation in a new light. We see in surveys that those who have a responsibility to make real decisions about the strategy and vision for a company, CXOs, they believe that innovation is a top priority for them. It's all about differentiation. Differentiation is critically important for the competitive advantage of a company. And we believe that this trend will increase in importance as the relative importance of services versus products is growing. And service differentiation will be central to the innovation efforts in the future. Now, of course, having said this, innovation is, of course, absolutely important, and it is a major pillar of digital transformation initiatives, but it's really just one pillar, and we shouldn't forget this. Innovation transformation is part of something larger, digital transformation, and it needs to be aligned with the other areas that are important for digital transformation, in particular technology, operations, and the employee engagement debate would be part of operations, and of course, whole notion around customer experience and customer engagement. Now, employee engagement is an issue for both open innovation and traditional R&D teams. Why, you might ask? Because they're quite different in approach and there are different dynamics involved here. But ultimately, there are people in both camps, and people have certain habits and certain attitudes. And we believe that employee engagement affects both camps because we need to see a shift in attitudes from the what's in it for me, what can I get for myself, towards the how can I contribute to a broader goal, to my organization, the shift that I highlighted earlier on from the from the employee satisfaction perspective towards the employee engagement perspective. And innovation transformation happens in many respects in the context of two axes. It's the incremental innovation, where you think about making something better and faster, and the transformative innovation, where it's about new business models. And another axis would be where you do things internally, like a traditional R&D team, and the other end of the axis would be the external innovation, open innovation, crowdsourcing. And it's really not about either one of them, but it is about both. It's about the different dynamics coming all together. Kim, I think you wanted to add a few thoughts along the notions I just outlined.
Absolutely. You make a really important point. In fact, in our 2018 State of the Crowdsourced Innovation report, one of the things that we heard from our respondents is that their primary objective when starting a crowdsourced innovation program was either to foster that culture of innovation that you're talking about, whether it's in the traditional R&D and reaching out to the rest of the organization, or whether it's reaching out beyond the four walls of your organization to external partners, that fostering that culture of innovation at 86%. And then the second highest objective related to starting their crowdsourced innovation program was about engaging employees, or that employee engagement topic that you're talking about. And that was 81% of our respondents raised that as their primary objective for crowdsourcing around innovation.
You're touching on a very important theme here, the cultural part. And there's an element, of course, that is very important and central to culture, and it's diversity and inclusion. And we see that it matters increasingly to businesses for a whole range of different reasons, but in particular for setting the tone of a business. The work culture is critical. So work culture is very much influenced by the people who are around in a business, of course. So the more diverse and the workforce is, the more likely it is that you reflect also the ideas, desires, requests of your customer base. And this in turn, of course, impacts the employee experience, the employee satisfaction rate, and the employee engagement levels. And this is, of course, the basis for the innovation culture. And we believe that innovation depends very much on employee diversity and inclusion, because ultimately the people who deliver ideas in a more open environment, they are your innovators. They see the more likely, they are good observers and good listeners. They are brave enough to ask tough questions, much more likely to experiment, and also they're more likely to be collaborative. And it's not really ticking boxes along the gender or ethnicity lines. I'm talking about really the diversity of thought that really needs to reflect the diverse customer base. And Kim, I think you also wanted to highlight the benefits of open innovation in this context as well.
Absolutely. When we're working with our clients on their crowdsourced innovation programs, we see program scale as being a very important aspect of being able to foster that culture of innovation that you're talking about. And this ties tightly to the point about inclusion, so giving everybody the opportunity to participate, as well as this concept of diversity. As a matter of fact, in our 2018 study, respondents indicated that a third or more of the solutions that they went forward with that came from their crowdsourced innovation challenges came from outside of the organization or department that was sponsoring the challenge. So that speaks to the importance of that diversity of thought in getting to the best ideas and the best solutions to move forward. So back to you.
Great, thank you. Now with this, let's move on to the next part of our discussion today, where we talk about employee engagement and experience as a part of the overall innovation, customer experience, and digital transformation drive. What is worth highlighting in this context is that from a people management perspective, it is fairly straightforward, and now I'm talking about this arrow that you see here, to get obedience and expertise out of your workforce. Obedience, they should work 9 and 5. Diligence means that they should be doing the job they're supposed to do, and expertise in this context means that they work along the best practices type of benchmark that is out there. This is something that you can more or less buy with a normal wage, a normal salary. Those types of employees are out there. What is much more challenging from a people management perspective, from an employee engagement perspective, is to tackle the next layer of participation by employees. It's much harder to trigger and stimulate self-initiative by employees. It's much harder to push for creativity from your employees. And it's very hard, of course, to get some real passion from your employees about work. Having said this, we have some clear evidence, and I highlighted some of the figures early on before we started the webinar. We have some clear data that underlines the importance of employee engagement. For instance, here from Gallup, we see that 59% engaged employees say that their job brings out the most creative ideas. That's critical for driving innovation. We see that 92% of the UK managers who describe the prevailing management style of the organization innovative feel proud. These factors are really critical for innovation, especially in the context of open innovation, which requires a real management innovation that is behind driving self-initiative, creativity, and passion. Now, these are observations that are, of course, important to set the basis for the next part of our discussion. And here we are talking about the customer experience directly. Customer experience is very much linked to the job of doing journey mapping. And we see that customer journey mapping drives agile innovation much more effectively and also depends on employee engagement increasingly. Now, one other observation is that innovation starts if you do the customer journey mapping with the identification of a customer challenge or desire by a particular customer, and that this particular challenge or the desire needs to be addressed. And the quality of employee engagement, of course, impacts the customer experience along the entire customer life cycle. So the different stages of the customer life cycle, from discover to explore to buy to use and ask and engage, they're all impacted by the quality of the employee engagement along this cycle. Why, you might ask? It's important to remember that customers can judge their own customer experience pretty well. We all do this on a daily basis. But if things go wrong, then we find it much tougher to pinpoint the issue that really caused our poor customer experience. Now, if you think about it, employees of a business that provided us the service or the product, very different position. They're in a much better position to pinpoint the reason why things went wrong, why we had a poor customer experience. It could either be a customer-facing employee, or it could be someone in the back office. Maybe it's someone from the technology team. But certainly, the main observation is that they are better placed than me as a customer to tell me why there is a poor customer experience. Now, what does this have to do with innovation? Once they understand the reason for the problem, they're, of course, in a much better position to innovate something that prevents a poor customer experience the next time around. And the interaction between the customer experience and the employee experience affects many different layers of a customer-oriented business relationship. Now, if we look at the different layers, we can see that the most effective innovation targets specific pain points and desires that arise as part of these different layers. And if we move, for instance, from the situation where our employee can get their work done from an employee experience perspective, this translates into productivity for a customer. It means that the customers get value from the experience. This is a very effective way to consume a product or a service. If employees believe that the organization helps them to focus on their most important work, this facilitates their work. And for the customer, it means they get value without any difficulties. It's the ease of doing business with this firm. And if the employees feel connected with their work, their colleagues and customers, and feel a purpose of the organization, there's this emotional connection that I talked about earlier on. And the same applies then to customers. They feel good about the experience, and they also build an emotion, which of course is critically important for brand building. And so you see the interlinkage between customer experience and employee experience is like a virtual circle. There's another element that we need to highlight, and this relates to trust and purpose of an organization, and also the transparency of how our business is being run. And here there are two elements to keep in mind. From a cognitive perspective, we see that employees connect logically and rationally with the organization when they are asking things like, how can I achieve my career goals at this particular organization? But there's an emotional side to it as well, where we see how employees emotionally connect with the organization and ask questions. Do my values align with my organization's work culture, for instance? And so it's the interaction between the cognitive with the emotional component that is central to building trust and driving the purpose of an organization. And this interaction, of course, also has an implication for innovation, because the engagement that is driven by trust and purpose and transparency leads to more innovation, and vice versa. More innovation leads to a greater employee engagement. And Kim, I believe you also wanted to talk about some elements of creativity and trust in this context as well.
Yes, it's an important virtuous cycle that you're talking about, the connection between employee engagement and innovation. And we see many organizations turning to their innovation programs as a means to engage their employees. And that trust and transparency is an important driver of that employee engagement, that ability to have the employee connect emotionally with the organization and be willing to give discretionary effort. And some of these drivers of employee engagement have really been left unaddressed previously by more traditional approaches to employee engagement, whether it's satisfaction surveys or those types of activities. Whereas crowdsourced innovation challenges allow the opportunity to connect employees with the company's strategy by putting forward strategic initiatives via crowdsource challenge, to show employees that leadership in the organization values their input and their ideas, another important driver of that employee engagement, employee experience. And most importantly, really using crowdsourced ideation challenges to identify and action ideas that help employees make progress on meaningful work that you were mentioning earlier, that important aspect of making progress on a day-to-day basis. So if you identify those things that are preventing progress and take action on that, it really makes a critical difference in that employee engagement. Back to you.
Excellent. Yes, thank you very much for these great additions to and insights to the whole story around trust as well. With this, we move on to the next section of our discussion this afternoon, and it relates to the assessment of your innovation capabilities, the maturity of your innovation initiative. And I hope we have now established the link between employee experience, employee satisfaction, the employee engagement, customer experience, and the innovation part of it. The next step would be to get a better feel for how good you are in terms of your current innovation capabilities. And there are many different models for assessing your innovation capabilities, but the point is that there are different facets to innovation And it's important to get a better sense for where are you strong, where are you weak in your different innovation capabilities. Now, at Forrester, we have grouped them into 5 broad buckets. The culture bucket, where it's very much about pushing management innovation and design thinking and other things like this. The strategy bucket, where we need to think about a business objective and then push the innovation initiatives. Thirdly, the structure, where we talk about issues like removing silos between departments and overcoming old divisions between the departments. The ecosystem bucket, where we look at how different partners and customers need to interact regarding innovation, and the technology bucket, where we look at the most appropriate technology to drive innovation and manage innovation. Now, next slide, please. For each one of these themes, for these buckets, there are, of course, many sub-themes that shape a particular bucket. And if we look at, for instance, the first one, the cultural bucket, so we need to assess our innovation culture by looking at our relative strength regarding issues such as our ability to drive creative thinking in our organization. We need to think about issues like what kind of competency to experiment do we have in our own organization? Is there a tendency to share ideas across different divisions? Are employees really actively involved in generating ideas and generating new innovation? What is the degree of employee diversity? And these kind of issues give you a much better sense for how strong your innovation culture really is. And I believe, Kim, you also wanted to add a few thoughts on the role of culture as well.
Absolutely. So as it relates to leveraging crowdsourced innovation platform and crowdsourced innovation challenges to foster that culture, our research showed us that there were 4 key levers that can help with establishing that culture. One relates to the frequency of engaging your employees in innovation challenges. So that concept of making innovation a daily habit. Diversity of participation and diversity of thought, that would be the second lever. Distribution of participation, so being inclusive and reaching out company-wide is another lever. And then lastly, the level of engagement or level of participation, not just in providing ideas, but also in commenting and refining other ideas, that concept of collaboration that you mentioned from a culture perspective. So those 4 key levers, frequency, diversity, distribution, and engagement or level of participation are things that we're seeing organizations have success with from a fostering culture perspective.
Excellent. Thank you so much. The next bucket that we looked at relates to innovation strategy. And again, below the main heading, so to speak, below the strategy heading, there are sub-themes such as, what is the support for driving business outcomes as part of your innovation strategy? What is the support for your organization's financial objectives? What is the role for business model innovation as part of your innovation activities? And the kind of themes that you see here, the sub-themes, are by no means the full list of issues that you should test when you're looking at your relative strength of innovation strategy. But they give you an indication of what kind of elements you should be testing to get a better sense for your innovation capability around the strategy component. Now, along the same thoughts, if you look at the innovation structure, there are a whole range of different issues that you should get a better sense for. Do you have a common language for innovation activities? Do you measure the innovation success? Are there regular adjustments of your innovation-related processes? Do you have a ability to kill off ideas, bad ideas at an early stage? Or, for instance, do you have a proper process in place for idea implementation? again, this is by no means the complete list of themes that you should be testing. It always also depends, of course, on your particular context. But again, the idea is to give you an idea of what kind of themes should be looked at as part of getting a better sense for your innovation structure. And if we move on to the next slide and look at innovation ecosystems, it's about testing your ability, your capability around contributing to digital ecosystems, for instance, the ability to access external third-party expertise. It's about the ability to drive interdisciplinary committees, innovation committees, or your ability to co-innovate across maybe a partner landscape. Again, not the complete list of issues that are part of deciding your relative strength in innovation ecosystems, but it gives you some idea of what areas to test. And the last bucket looks at innovation technology, and here we would test issues such as the ability of the technology to scale. We would look at the issues of your ability to understand and navigate through emerging technology trends that relate to innovation. It's about finding the right technologies for driving better customer experience, for, of course, driving the whole notion of customer engagement, for instance, the voice of the employee type of tools. And of course, the quality of your innovation management tools would come up here. So again, many different themes that might not be on the list here, but it gives you an indication of what kind of areas are worth looking before you get a better sense for your overall innovation maturity. With this kind of self-assessment of your innovation capabilities, you get a much better result and a much better feel for where you stand relative to the different buckets that are outlined, but potentially also relative to some of your peers or competitors. And in most innovation assessment models, you get a final result of a score that groups you either as a innovation beginner or some form of intermediate innovator or advanced innovator. And these different high-level groups, beginner, intermediate, and advanced, of course, then mean that you need to think about different themes in terms of taking the next step. And the recommendations, therefore, that I want to finish this webinar off with have different connotations depending on where you would find yourself. And if you are a beginner, and that is, if you are a beginner as a result of your self-assessment, then it's firstly very important to define the strategic objective for your innovation initiative. And here are 2 points that are worth considering. You need to decide whether you want to protect your core business on the one hand, or whether you are ready to actually completely transform your core business. And secondly, make a decision whether you want to improve your products, your services, make them faster, cheaper, or on the other hand, do you want to think about building completely new brands and business models? And if you don't have defined what your overall innovation objective is, it's very unlikely that you will make any sustainable progress beyond initial pilot schemes. Now, the second component here, if you're a beginner, the second objective to address is that you need to think about assessing your innovation capabilities and discover the innovation gaps and address any shortcomings. Now, you might wonder, why do I see the issue of conducting a self-assessment again at this stage? And the reason is that the self-assessment is not a one-off exercise. You need to repeat this process regularly. And I would even suggest that it's good to invite partners, maybe even customers who could rate your innovation capabilities more objectively than you might be able to do so yourself. The point is, innovation self-assessment exercise is something that should be repeated over and over again. In particular, if you are at an early stage, get in the habit of doing this kind of exercise every other week or every other month. Define specific innovation objectives and then move on to the next stage. But you need to get a sense for where you are and how the innovation capabilities evolve. And the last point worth mentioning here, if you're at the beginner stage and the objective is around structuring your innovation initiatives, relates to deploying innovation management tools. These are very effective tools to support repeatable and more sustainable innovation. They help you in particular with the elements of structure, defining a structure, and also triggering a culture of participation. This is something that we hear over and over again from customers, from users of these management innovation tools. They're very effective to create a more streamlined process and also cracking the ice, breaking the ice to get people to participate more. Now, if you happen to be already at the intermediate stage, you should also tap into the whole world of startup innovation and reaching out to startup skills. Reach out and work with incubators, find the right accelerators in your space, your sector, to channel fresh innovation into your business, from outside into your business. These are fresh ideas, new skills. There's a different culture. There's a different world out there, and ideas coming into your business. This is a very helpful way to drive innovation, and they're also outside your corporate immune system. They will not be killed off immediately by your own internal structures. Secondly, you need to think about speeding up innovation cycles. This is important because customer expectations, they're changing much faster than traditional R&D innovation cycles. And therefore, it's important to embrace iterative and agile innovation that really speed up innovation cycles dramatically. And thirdly, for the intermediate stage, it's important to remember to better serve the human needs and desires and intentions, and prioritize the culture of innovation as the most important element of the overall innovation endeavor. This is not something that we are making up. We hear this over and over again from companies that culture is the biggest stumbling block, and you need to tackle this issue upfront, in particular if you are at an intermediary stage already. Without tackling it, without overcoming this roadblock, you will never really become an advanced innovator. And with this, I move on to the most advanced stage, where our main objective would be to create a real structure for sustainable innovation. And it's important, if you have a sustainable innovation structure, to have the right governance and the right processes in place. So process design for co-innovation, for instance, the intellectual property rights management, for instance, but also GDPR, so privacy and data protection kind of issues might well be part of this objective. Second objective for the advanced innovator is to design innovation initiatives that support business outcomes. It's important to align the innovation to customer journeys, employee journeys, and outcomes that drive experiences. And so run customer journeys, run employee journeys, and link them to business outcomes. The third objective for the advanced innovator stage relates to protecting fragile and transformative innovation which is not core to your traditional business. It's very much at risk from what I earlier on called the corporate immune system, which would kill off any really radically different ideas. So treat early innovation, young, fragile innovation differently from the incremental innovation. Think about standalone divisions or work with external labs and partners who would be able to protect the transformative and fragile innovation. And the last element here for the advanced stage relates to measuring of failure of innovation initiatives. And here we see that setting the innovation metrics that reflect business outcomes are really important. So align the innovation to business outcome metrics. In all of the tasks that we just discussed, employees, of course, play a fundamental role. So employee engagement is a relevant theme that applies throughout the entire exercise of testing your innovation maturity, but then also to implement the objectives that we just discussed. Now, to summarize, and feel free to reach out to me as well, and you have my contact details here. First of all, innovation is moving up the list of CXO priorities. We see this. Secondly, innovation is part of something larger. Digital transformation is a major theme. Innovation is one of the major pillars in this process. Align your innovation activities to the technology transformation, the transformation of your operations, and your customer experience activities. And thirdly, remember that this is not a sprint, this is much more of a marathon. And fourthly, innovation, although it's part of the overall digital transformation initiative, will be a theme that will stick around when the whole digital transformation hype subsides. Innovation needs to be sustainable for the long haul, and therefore it's worth treating it separately from your innovation, from your digital transformation activities. These are two separate issues. Yes, there are interlinkages, but they're two separate issues. And so the employee engagement component needs to be part of the overall transformation, and it has a huge impact on how you shape your innovation strategy, think about your innovation strategy. And as I said earlier on in my comments when I started off, I'm not entirely sure which activity drives what. Is innovation driving employee engagement or employee engagement driving innovation? I believe they are absolutely intertwined, and they are in a very close linkage. And hopefully, if you do the right things, this is a virtuous circle, and you will benefit tremendously if you can drive up your employee engagement levels by having a much better ratio of innovation success. With this, I'd like to thank you all, and I believe we have a few minutes still for Q&A.
Absolutely. Dan, thank you so much for your practical recommendations around addressing innovation gaps at any level, beginner, intermediate, or advanced. Really appreciate it. To our audience, if you have questions, please do enter them into the chat box, and we will do our best to get to all of them. And while our audience is entering their questions in, I wanted to reflect on one story or one experience that we had with a client that reflects back on your point about prioritizing innovation culture and how important that is to success in as they were getting ready to launch an initiative around crowdsourced innovation. They did a culture survey. So they reached out to all of their employees to get a feel for where the employees were at. And what they learned through this culture survey was that they were in trouble. They had a real challenge around the culture, and the responses were coming back. Why would you ask for my ideas? You don't listen to my ideas. You don't want to know what I think. I'm told I'm not paid to think, I'm paid to do. And so they recognized that they had their work cut out for them from a cultural perspective. And they went after it and started to launch ideation challenges, engaging employees and gathering their ideas, and then in a transparent way, selecting the best ideas and moving them forward. And as a result of that, they would say that they've seen a massive transformation from an employee engagement perspective and from a cultural perspective. And so that is a really important input to the innovation outcome that you're looking for. The first question, Dan, that has come in is, we have many separate innovation initiatives going on at the same time in our organization, but they're uncoordinated. What can be done to create a more coherent approach to innovation?
Good question, and I believe that there's a two-pronged answer to this. Firstly, certainly makes sense to have a central innovation team, a team that is responsible for innovation overall, to avoid every division doing their own bolt-on innovation activity. So an interdisciplinary team from different departments that is responsible overall for driving innovation. But the other part of the equation would be that you need to think about bringing in the right tools. So innovation management tools can help tremendously to bring the different innovation activities together, create a structure, a framework where everybody in your company can participate in the different innovation contests that are out there, the different innovation initiatives. And it helps tremendously to bring some order and into the whole process and to streamline operations. Maybe you wanted to add some ideas here as well, Kim?
Absolutely. When you think about the your point about central team, one of the things that we see our clients be successful with is starting in a centralized manner, and then more of a data fit, then taking on maybe more of a federated role where the central team is supporting lines of business that are running their innovations, but there's still some central coordination going on in that federated model, if you will, from a governance perspective. Another question that came in is, to what extent does emerging technology impact my innovation approach?
Well, we see that emerging technology is absolutely critically important as part of the overall innovation process. And it's really important to stay on top of the key technologies, how they impact a particular sector, for instance. Different technologies have a different impact on the sector and the processes involved. But it's at the same time important to remember that technology in and of itself is just a means to an end. And nonetheless, innovation is greatly enabled with the right technology. So to get a better sense of how technology impacts your innovation initiative, I would suggest that it's important also to work with partners that have the right skills regarding these emerging technologies if you don't have all the in-house expertise, for instance, in the AI space, deep learning, and data analytics area, for instance, just to name one issue that certainly has an impact on many different sectors. But keep a very good eye on emerging technologies that impact your processes and your business model.
Absolutely. Here, another question that has come in. My organization is risk averse and prefers to stick to incremental innovation to keep risk of failure low. Is our strategy to become a fast follower a sensible approach to manage digital transformation?
Well, innovation, transformation, and we discussed it, the shift from the R&D-driven information model towards a much more open, crowdsourced type of model. This is not something that happens overnight in most business. And if we bring it in the context of employee engagement, we are really talking about a long and winded road. And so there is no need to immediately panic. You do have some time to reject your innovation activities, but it's important to start now to develop a much clearer strategy for your employee engagement and your innovation strategy for the coming years, because it's very likely that you will have to reach out to partners that bring new skill sets, bring new ideas, think about new business models that you don't have in-house. And so I would say a fast follower might be an approach for the interim period, but at least in terms of your strategy development, it's important that you think ahead quickly and think ahead over the next 5 to 10 years. Don't just think about the next 2 to 3 years, because you might make some mistakes along the lines of planning your strategy and aligning your innovation strategy to your overall strategy if you have a very short time horizon. You need to think a bit further.
Another question came in that relates to your comments of the advanced level innovation where you talk about setting innovation metrics. Are there recommended metrics to innovation?
Sorry, could you repeat this? Your line broke up a little bit.
Are there recommended metrics to track the impact of innovation?
Oh, yeah. Oh, absolutely. I mean, we talked about metrics early on, and metrics are critical to get a better sense for what innovation works, what doesn't work, what impact does the innovation have. It's important for many different reasons, not least to demonstrate to the budget holders that it's worth spending money, spending a part of the budget on new innovative initiatives. And so it's absolutely critical to link innovation to business outcomes, and metrics are the only way to achieve this. And therefore, I mentioned earlier on, it's important to use metrics that are reflecting business outcomes, because if you have metrics that are completely not related to business outcomes, it's very hard to establish, point towards this link. So it's absolutely important to use metrics wherever you can.
Yeah.
Do you have some specific examples of business outcome related metrics that you've seen organizations use?
Well, I would suggest to work it backwards.
Okay, I'll watch for him. Yeah, I'm on a car now, but I'll watch for him when I see him. I'll run out there.
I think we have someone who could go on mute, please. So if you look at particular business outcomes and define the metric, describe this business outcome, you link it back to an innovation initiative that is specifically addressing these business metrics. So that's the most effective way to really create the linkage between your innovation activities and a business outcome. That's why I mentioned the customer journey mapping earlier on. If you can define the pain points, the opportunities very precisely, then you can build your innovation and initiative around it much more easily.
Great. Thank you, Dan. One of the last questions, a few moments, as we've been talking about the intersection between employee engagement and innovation, what role can or should HR take as it relates to this intersection?
Well, HR plays obviously a central role for managing employees, and therefore it is an integral part of any effort to enhance customer engagement and create a better employee experience. And having said this, HR needs to reach out and work with other teams like the technology team or the business leaders of different divisions, whether it's marketing, product development or so, to drive a better employee engagement to ensure that the overall customer experience is really aiming at the right innovation initiatives. But HR has to be part of the picture, needs to take on a central position, but it will never be a situation where one particular manager or department is fully in charge of the whole innovation or engagement, employee engagement initiative. It will have to be a give and take, a collaborative approach.
It's an important partnership to move forward. I totally agree. Well, we're nearly to the end of our time. If we can move to the next slide. Dan, I thank you so much again for sharing your insight. And you mentioned a couple of things in the Q&A about the connection between innovation and digital transformation, and also the important need that organizations have to sometimes go outside of their own organization for resources if they do not have in-house experts. And to that end, I want to encourage the audience to watch for our next series of webinars where we're focusing on getting ideas into execution for innovation success. And we will be featuring our partnership with TopCoder to accelerating digital transformation using crowdsourcing, not only in the front end of innovation or identifying ideas, but also in the execution of those ideas. So that webinar will be coming up on October the 23rd, and invite you all to keep an eye out for that. And again, Dan, thank you so much for sharing your insights today. Thank you all for joining us, and have a great day.
Thank you as well.